A couple of other binaries before I talk about the binaries I'm meant to is there is sometimes a binary between youth and age. I know today and tomorrow the emphasis is on youth sexualities and sexual health. But let's not forget that we were all young people once. Look at me, I'm striking my David Bowie. At the age of 13 in 1973, I saw David Bowie on Happening 73, those of you who are old enough to remember. Black and white TV, working class Italian girl, and he shifted, budding little queer straight feminist out there from an ethnic background who suddenly went, there is a way for aliens like me, and we'll find it. And I spent a Bowie Nerd Fest 2 days at a symposium recently, and I was like, yes, it was wonderful. So let's not forget we've all been there. Let's not forget that, as Moira said, we've got all sorts of technologies out there, and many adults, most adults, are still journeying through their own sexualities and sexual health. FetLife, Ashley Madison, Cougar, BD, great sites, poor sites, it's all out there. And let's not forget, this is not about blaming or constructing youth as problematic. It's about all of us journeying through with our sexualities. I also want to commend you, and I said this to Alana, you're dealing with some pretty tough issues, especially around termination of pregnancies. And I just want to commend you on engaging with these debates. I only found out a couple of months ago, I've lost 2 of my parents, my auntie and uncle. And I only just found out recently from my surviving parents that my grandmother in a poor little village of Italy she had a few miscarriages. She tried to terminate my uncle's birth, her pregnancy, failed. Thank goodness in a way, because he's now my uncle, but he passed away. But she also terminated another pregnancy before my father was born. And she did that with other women present. There was no medical access. I now understand another factor why my parents and my grandmother were so anti-church and anti-fascist. And also another factor, I wish she had told me when she was alive, I'm going to cry now. She was my role model and mentor, one of them, that she had gone through that back then. These issues are not issues of today, and that's why I really want to commend you on these struggles and these debates, because I think they're really important. And I didn't know until a few weeks ago that it was very much present in my family. I knew it amongst my girlfriends, but not amongst my grandparents. So thank you. Okay, let's get going. So I'm going to talk about other binaries and borders. And I've used these icons because these are the icons that many of us use in our work with culturally diverse and sexually diverse and gender diverse young people, and especially in our AGMC work. And it's about the intersectionalities that go beyond ethnic, non-ethnic, gay, straight, and also the intersectionalities between ethnic groups and between sexual groups that we need to engage with. It's a world of multiplicity, ambiguity, complexity that we live in. It's not a black-white world, and it's certainly not a gay-straight world. So I want to talk about, and I'm using Judith Butler's work in terms of the limits of the sayable. And I want to engage with the idea that sexual health policies, programs, pedagogies and pastoral care sometimes perpetuate sexual and relationship dichotomies. So on the one hand, you have still the unquestionable and the unquestioned affirmation and support of heteronormativity and heterosex, heteroreproductive sex, especially as we're hearing today. So straight monogamous relationships, and there is a place and there's a space and there's a word called agentic fidelity, which is about, yeah, absolutely, abstinence, absolutely, monogamy, absolutely, heterosexuality. On the other hand, we have an increasing, but as we know, still questioned affirmation and support to what is being called homonormativity. That now, and it's so important to have equal rights to all sorts of relationship ways of being and doing. But we're starting to find a heteronormative world, straights, who are still sometimes defining the good gays and the bad gays. The good gays are the ones who get married, have mortgages, have children. And interestingly, and this is really problematic to say this, but interestingly, and I know from diverse ethnic communities, that's when the grandparent factor kicks in. Oh, you've had kids, you've settled down, you've had a marriage, you've had a wedding. Great, you're like us. And I'll now take care of the children. And suddenly Again, very valid, very important. Equity. However, there are people who are not fitting in. In excess of those binaries, on the borders or falling into the gaps, you have young people who are not gay or straight. Young people are from diverse cultural backgrounds who do not use those words, those terms. These are some of the terms that are coming through youth cultures, adult cultures, etc. And I know Linda will talk about this more. Bisexual, heteroflexible, people who identify straight and behave not so straight. Homoflexible, people who may identify as gay and behave not so gay. Sexually fluid, from the Japanese yaoi culture in the fan fiction clubs, there are the fujoshi and the fudanshi. And by the way, you can buy these in your newspaper supermarkets in Japan, but you can't actually get them into Australia. Fujoshi are naughty girls. These are girls who like reading and looking at comics, animation, and doing online sex between men. So they're like the hot boy-on-boy action. And they identify as straight girls. They're also called girl fags. Janet Hardy has put that word out there. The fudanshi are the straight men in relationships with these girls who also like boy-on-boy action, animation and comics and fandom. So these are some of the cultures that, as Moira said, we may not be necessarily, if you're an adult like me, aware of, but it's happening in another space, in other networks, especially for young women who, you know, the hot girl-on-girl action is pretty normative in porn for straight men. A lot of girls are going, that's, you know, under the radar, they're experiencing those desires and constructing their own. You know, who are the guys from Twilight? Apparently there's a heaps of sex going on between those two guys online in girls' fan fiction, and Watson and Holmes and Kirk and Spock. And this is where heterosexual young women are taking the power, the agency to go, well, look, you know, boy-on-boy action isn't available on that billboard, but I'm going to construct it myself and I'm going to go in and change. And so there's all these cultures going on there. There's mixed orientation relationships where people might identify as bi and are marrying straight people, you know, there's just all sorts of intersectionalities. Polyamorous relationships, which are negotiated, open relationships with more than one person. It's not polygamy, which is male-centred, one male, more women. Polyamorous is about everyone, ideally, sharing in and being very open and ethical about what they're doing with each other. I love this quote from Wendy. It says it all, really. I could just sit down now. The world isn't heterosexual or homosexual, it's lots of sexuals. I think that should be a word, and I love Wendy. She was in one of my books for that. So what's happening with all of us and young people is that there's three kinds of factors that come into play here. Social ascription, do we de-sex or do we over-sex? I mean, you know, I find it really problematic when I read some of these so-called girls' magazines and it's like, okay, 30 orgasms in 30 minutes, go girls, you deserve this. Like there's another pressure there, you know, so there's a pressure of abstinence, but there's also pressure of this is what it means to be a sexual agentic young woman, or this is what it means to be a sexually out there young man. There's also community acknowledgement. Different communities will acknowledge different facets of oneself. So what does it mean to belong? What gets encouraged? What gets discouraged in the various spaces, social sites that young people are moving in and out of, and I've said some there. And of course you've got the, you know, I'll go back to social ascription, you've got the two kind of dominant discourses still out there, which is, you know, the barsexuals. I love these new words coming out. Barsexuals are straight girls who have pash each other on the dance floor, play up with each other, and hey, great. However, most of these girls are doing it to please their boyfriends. So there's a gender power and privilege stuff happening there around who gets to dictate who does what with who, and we know we need to address that. And then, of course, the bi boys are always bad. They're always, you know, doing the beats, or they're betraying their girlfriends and carrying STIs. And then there's personal agency, my sex. And this is where the individual, as Moira, Mary Lou, everyone has said, have to figure out, well, where are they going to be in all these regulations and oppressions? They've done studies, and I just want to quickly go through this. And as I said, you can analyse this more carefully. a lot of studies are showing that bisexual young people or young people between the binaries actually have poorer sexual health, and they have poorer use. I mean, they've got more problems around mental health, substance and drug use, and less support from families and less support from either gay or straight peers, because they're considered this kind of like, you know, the stereotype of you don't know what they're going to do, where they're going to be, they're going to betray you, there's a problem, they should choose, all those kinds of debates. So you can have a look at that when you get this slide. There's now become a mainstream in marketing of bisexuality, so again, we've addressed that. How do we in schools with young people address the commodification of diverse sexualities to sell products? And, you know, let's have discussions about the fact, and as you said, I feel like I've got an easy job up here. Moira, you know, you said that, you know, this is going on, these fan clubs, these mainstreaming and under the radar streaming is happening, and yet we may not be engaging with this with young people, providing them opportunities to discuss these kinds of things. So, hate to do this plug, but if you want to know more about those kinds of beyond binaries, that's some of the stuff I've written. I'm really honoured to have worked with people like Lynn Hillier, Daniel Marshall, Tiffany Jones, Margaret Robinson, who looks at Canadian Native First Peoples and Two-Spiritedness. A whole lot of people have come together to produce a wonderful anthology called Bisexuality in Education. John Elia from the University of San Francisco has written about health and sexual health of bisexual people, using that term bisexuality. So that's one of the binaries, the fluidity of sexuality that many people experience and that is not being addressed. You know, there's something called exclusion by inclusion, you know, GLBT, GLBT, GLBT. But do we have specificities, specific ways of addressing diverse sexuality? Okay, moving on to the other binary. If we look at multicultural, multi-faith and multisexual, people who belong, and I think you've covered this so well, Mary Lou, you know, like people who belong to diverse cultures and religions is about how do we support these young people in developing healthy sexual, cultural and gender identities, the multiple selves. How do we support them in living within what Mary Kalantzis and Bill Cope call the multiple life worlds, resolving, managing, negotiating conflicts that may arise between different worlds, around their sexualities, around abstinence, around sexual agency. And then what about the fact that many of them are experiencing multiple marginalities? Now, I work with AGMC, become a member, I'll tell you all about them in a minute. For example, we're holding an event at Hares and Hyenas August the 1st, 5:30, where we're going to get a lot of men who identify as gay and come from diverse religious and cultural backgrounds who are going to talk about the discriminations within the queer communities. You know, it's okay to have a big black stud for sex, but you wouldn't take him home to your mum. Or it's okay to... And by the way, what I meant by the binary between ethnic and non-ethnic is that, for example, some of the Italian and Greek and the more established members of diverse communities are actually being racist and religiously bigoted against other members of the community. So you'll get, you know, guys saying, oh, you know, an Italian guy going, well, I'm not going to go out with a terrorist. And this person doesn't do drugs, doesn't drink alcohol, you know, what's wrong with them? They don't belong. So these are, you know, these are some of the issues we've got to address, multiplicities and intersectionalities. So these are some of the concerns that, and again, I'll leave you that to have a look at. And again, I don't want to paint this horrible victim. I love the words you use, you know, the wounded identities. I don't want to develop that discourse. I don't want to talk about that all ethnic communities, you know, there's problems. Trust me, there aren't. But where there are, these are some of the concerns. So you've got people who are within these binaries around queer communities and their cultural communities. Our job is how do we support them. These are some of the specific health issues, and I'm working with, I'm on the boards of the Multicultural Board and the LGBT Priorities Communities Boards with Vic Police, and these are some of the issues that are coming through specific to young people of diverse genders and diverse sexualities from cultures. There is violence. Sometimes there is violence from some young men, sexual assault towards young women who may not identify as straight, as a way of making them straight or making them conform to a particular construct of heterosexual femininity. Homelessness. And, you know, telling a young person, say from Somali background, as we've had reports, to come out and join the lesbian community, and then to suddenly that person is, you know, finding themselves economically deprived, has lost family, has lost a whole range of things is very problem. Financial and other deprivations. We are hearing about deportations, where some young people are being taken home to be cured, home, for arranged marriages. There's a wonderful out gay imam here in Victoria. Please get in touch with us or AGMC, Noor Wasami, and he runs Marhaba to support young Muslim, LGBTIQ, queer Muslims, who spends a lot of time at the hospital addressing suicidality and issues here. So there's good work being done. Also links between violent behaviours and same-sex attraction, substance abuses and rapes and other forms of sexual... In South Africa, I think it's called recuperative or reparative rape or something. It's an awful term, and we are seeing some of it come into our communities here. And I'm not here to demonise any community. This is not what I do, but if we're going to address those issues today, we have to look at these. I'm tired of the ethnic excuses. And these excuses are used not only by people who are, I hate these words, non-ethnic, ethnic, but also sometimes people from within certain communities. Let's have a look at our health services. Let's have a look at our schools. Are we hearing things like, oh, there's too much to do. We can't do homophobia. We can't talk about sexual and gender diversity. You know, this idea of othering. This is a moral issue. I love what you said, Moira, about, well, yeah, has anybody actually asked the parents who would actually support us? Are we living in this Foucauldian panopticonic world where we're constantly policing ourselves because we think, and it could be real, but it could not be real, to what extent, that we are being surveyed and regulated? You know, let's try and get some data on that. This idea about cultural heritage and maintenance of cultural traditions. Whose cultural heritage? Whose cultural tradition? Who are the gatekeepers of our various communities? It is not racist to raise these questions in culturally appropriate and ways of engaging in discussion. And I hate it when, you know, oh, you're racist, miss, because you said, well, you know, let's take young people back to their pre-Christian, pre-colonial heritages. You know, some of the most gender diverse people came from the Pacific Islands before they were told to dress up and go male or female. You know, each island had the whawhaine, whakawhaine, I can't even say it, they laugh when I say it. Let's take young people back to those cultural traditions. So whose cultural tradition? I mean, Muhammad married Katia Kawalid, who was 20 years older than him, ran her own businesses in the Middle East, never hijabbed. You know, he was like a personal secretary to her, and then she married him. You know, like, where is this in the story of what we've had constructed, man-made, of Islam? You know, let's go back to some of those beginnings. And consensus and what we call three-parent syndrome. So these are some of the questions we need to ask. You know, who is constructing a particular version of a religion? Who is constructing a particular culture? Is it lack of education that is actually more the forefront? Is it a lack of literacy around the body, around sexuality? Are we talking about spiritual needs, or are we talking about a man-made dogma or interpretation of a religion? When I read love poetry from the 14th century from Rumi or other Islamic poets, they're writing to their same-sex partners. You know, where are those histories in religions and in others? Who are the gatekeepers? Where are the alternative views? The alternative views out there, many very positive, fantastic people in various communities who are willing to work with us, work with each other. And so I've addressed this. I love that. I can't help putting that cartoon up there. Sometimes the only time people from diverse religions unite is on this issue around, you know, etc. And this whole construct of religious freedom, you know, we need to engage with it, which is, I think, what Mary Lou was saying. Like, let's engage with these debates. Let's not impose as another form of colonialism a particular view of sexualities, but let's engage with what was there, what is there now, who is there, who are the gatekeepers, and the racism and the tensions going on between diverse communities really needs to be addressed. So we need to ask, before we kind of demonise or strategise, let's talk about, well, what are the range of beliefs in every ethnic community? I mean, nobody ever bothered to ask, and I say this over and over again, I'm sorry if I'm boring, but nobody ever bothered to ask my parents if they were homophobic. You know, they're little wogs, they're the Italian migrants who can hardly speak English, they don't turn up to parent-teacher nights. Well, they didn't, because they didn't know how to speak to the teachers, they were embarrassed. But nobody bothered to ask them if they were homophobic. You know, and so let's move on from this assumption that there is a one homogenous view in every community we work with. Which community workers and religious leaders are out there who can act as mediators, key informants, facilitators, who can tell those of us who do not belong to those communities how to go about it, what they need, what are the issues here? And where is asexuality in all of this, for example, and how do we raise all these issues with each other? Is coming out appropriate? You know, my ideal, of course. We shouldn't even have a discourse of needing to come out. But the dilemma is, the reality is right now, various communities are in various positions, and therefore let's work with young people's health, sexually and otherwise, and take them where they are now and support them to keep moving. So how do we do this work ethically, rather than endangering young people with a particular version of what is healthy? It's really complex, I know. Here's this one. How do we inform young people about their own cultures and religions? How do we, you know, if you've got a Maori guy who's being homophobic, tell him about the takatapui. Yeah, Maori men, warriors. You know, did you know that they used to fight next to their same-sex lovers? Because isn't that a pretty good military strategy? Fight next to someone you love because you're going to fight harder. Where's that in Maori cultural history that's been, I don't mean to be demonising here, but Christianised, you know? We don't hear that version of that story. And there are some beautiful DVDs, there are beautiful resources that are coming out from various countries. And also it means that we get beyond this colonial thing that the West has to teach the non-West how to do sexual diversity. There are lots of stories and lots of great movements coming out. So what are some of the common understandings? As you said, most parents want good for their children. We need to say, well, you know, if you're talking about loving your kids, so let's talk about the importance of family. Let's talk about, you know, what are the fears that some parents may have around this work. It may not be the sexuality issues. It could be things like, are they going to be alone when they're old? Are they going to spend every day doing Mardi Gras? I mean, you know, what are they watching on our media? What are they seeing as a dominant discourse of? And is sexuality the problem? I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. What are the fears that many parents may have? Of course, you know, they don't want their kids to be doomed to hell. You know, how do we deal with those religious doctrine? The media images, where are the role models and the images of sexually diverse and gender diverse young people from various communities, rural communities, lower socioeconomic communities? You know, who gets the prime cultural space when we hear gay, or when we see lesbian, or when we see heterosexual? Like, what are the prime images, visuals? White people? And, you know, the drugs and alcohol stuff, of course. And how significant are issues of sexuality in a young person's life? They are significant. But again, this could be controversial, but for some young people, having a go in Australia, establishing themselves, getting through school, learning English, maybe for a while some of those factors may be more important. But how are we going to be there to support them and make sure that their sexual health is on the agenda as part and parcel of everything else they are and that they do? So come along, be a member of AGMC, find out what we do. We support lots of different groups. We have lots of counsellors and people that we can refer you to who are happy to come and work with you. I think a couple of our members came to Shepparton. Damon, we got a great report about a wonderful time they had and the meeting they had, and so there's some great stuff that is happening. And we've also got members from ACON in New South Wales, Min, who's really brilliant, and Benjamin O. So we're kind of like asked to go around and be a bit of a travelling show. There's some fantastic resources. If you look up Gay and Lesbian Health Victoria, there's a wonderful list of great resources. I think Anne Mitchell put these amazing resources together, and they're there. These are some of the reports that are coming out. The Arabic-speaking families and homophobia report, and Archers, of course, has done the queer young refugees work. There's a new project about to be launched in Archers around refugees. And finishing off really quickly, these are some of the other awesome research papers, reports about young people from diverse cultural and religious backgrounds to read. Lots of resources. Please go and chat to Roland and Crusader at Hares and Hyenas. They can find all sorts of wonderful stuff for you. Become a member of ILGA, the International Lesbian and Gay Association. They will take you into every country and what is happening around sexual and gender diversity in those countries that a lot of young people in our schools find really fascinating. And it divests this idea of Western imperialism, only the West is doing it. There's incredible movements in places like Zimbabwe, Uganda, all these places that we hear about only in negative terms. And this is a great little text by Abe Attar, which has chapters by one of my PhD students, Sekne, and Aliena Muhammad Ali, who used to be the chair of AGMC, and we've written about Muslim, Islam and queer. And Fedi's book also has a chapter on by Leanne Lowe, who belongs to the Yellow Kitties, which is the Asian lesbian and bisexual women's group here in Victoria. And she's the editor of Yellow Peril. Don't you love that? The Yellow Peril magazine. And within that, she talks about how a lot of these magazines and cultural spaces in diverse cultures and religions are starting to just incorporate stories from other communities. And then there's my stuff, and I'll stop there. I hope I didn't go too over time. Thank you.